Being mindful is the practice of maintaining a non-judgmental state of heightened or complete awareness of one's thoughts, emotions, or experiences on a moment-to-moment basis, which can be extremely important while trying to understand and learn more about mental health. So let me welcome you to Mindful Thoughts. My name is Deloris, and I feel like my mission in life is to help break down those barriers around mental wellness by sharing personal stories, tips, and confessions of mental health to help us shine a light on mental wellness. So what are we waiting for? Let's dive in. Hey guys, today we're going to talk about another type of depression, and that is situational depression, or also known as adjustment disorder. And it is exactly what you think it is. It is depression that comes on during a stressful or life-changing situation like losing a job, a death of a family member, divorce, moving. It is something that is triggered and makes you upset and sad and makes you cry a lot. And for a lot of people, this made me think of the pandemic. The pandemic was the first time for a lot of people where they lost their jobs and they didn't know what they were going to do. And then on top of that, their friends and family members could have been passing away or might have passed away because of this virus that came out of nowhere. First, you were living this normal life, and then out of nowhere the world was shutting down. You were on lockdowns, you had restrictions, you had mask mandates, and life was turned upside down. And for a lot of people, this was the first time they had to deal with a stressful situation that hit them personally, because of course you can watch people on TV and the news talk about all the stuff that other people are going through, but it's different when it happens to you. So I talked about this before, where this was the first time that a lot of people were anxious and having depression because of what was going on in the world. And it was one of those things that a lot of people didn't know how to cope with. But of course, over time, when the world got back to a somewhat normal life and stuff was reopening again, and then you didn't have to wear a mask, a lot of people didn't feel the feelings they had before because it was no longer something that was stressing them out and they were dealing with. This is a depression that impacts a person's feelings, a way they think about themselves, and the way they think about the outside world, which can impact their behavior and their actions. So a lot of people had a lot of things to say about the masks and the stuff that was going on in the world and how that upset them. And it just makes you think that how many people for the first time were dealing with depression because of what was going on in the world, and they didn't know that's what they were dealing with, but they were dealing with it because it was situational depression. It was a situation that affected them greatly, that in return made them feel feelings they've never felt before. So another thing that I can think about is when you lose a loved one. You could have situational depression because of the situation. You lose somebody you love either because it is of natural causes or it's suddenly out of nowhere, and you don't know how to cope with that. You're extremely sad because of course you've lost somebody you love and you've lost somebody you care about, and of course you have all these thoughts of you're never going to talk to them again, you're never going to see them again, you're never going to hug them again. And for a lot of people, they grieve for a very long time depending on who the person was and how that person impacted their life, because your friends could also do that. If you lose a friend that is close to you and deeply you had love for them, it can impact your life. Now, of course, for some people, like I said, depending on the person, over time it gets easier to cope with the fact that they're gone. Now, of course, I think within the first couple years to maybe even 3 to 4 years, it could still be difficult when holidays come up or when their birthdays come up, because that's another memory for you to realize that you can no longer celebrate with them, and they're no longer there to be a part of the celebrations, like the holidays, and it can be very upsetting. But I also think over time you find ways to cope with it, And like I've always told myself, and I want to tell you guys, that I think when those situations come up, and instead of thinking of like all the negativity and the negative things that could come around that, think of the moments you've had with them, and think of the things that you joked about, and think about the things that made you happy and the time you spent with them. And that can almost help you heal too over time, knowing that you were able to make these memories with them, and even though they're not here anymore, you're still able to celebrate them in some way. It's like when you lose a job. You get sad because you lost that job and you don't know what you're going to do, but eventually you're going to find another job, and you're going to be able to live in a life that you in the moment think you can't live. Or like divorce. Divorce can be hard on the people going through it, but if there's kids involved, that can be even harder, because now you're not just going through it, but your kids are going through it. So the sadness that you feel is going to be different than the sadness your kids feel. And I think over time, you and the kids are able to cope with what's going on and find ways to keep up the positivity and have like a positive light on it than a negative light on it. So when you think about situational depression, it's in a situation that changes your life or is triggered from the sudden change. But they say that it starts 3 months after that stressful event happens, but then it lasts no longer than 6 months. So if you experience depression and it's lasting longer than 6 months, you might want to reach out to your doctor, because that is a trigger to say you're dealing with something more than just a brief moment of depression like situational depression is, because it's just in the situation. So during that time of the pandemic, people were feeling this way, but then once it was over and once people were able to get back into the world, they no longer felt this way. Or when you go through a divorce, in the moment it's sad and it's upsetting, but then over time you learn to either be okay by yourself, or for some people they find somebody else to share their life with and they're no longer triggered by it. Or like when you lose a loved one, at first it is devastating and it takes over your whole world, but then over time and over the years, you of course can still be sad about it, but you're not as devastated about it, and you over time learn good coping mechanisms to really deal with it in a different way that is healthier and more productive. This one I just wanted to share with you guys because I think sometimes when we go through something hard or traumatic or something that we don't know how to deal with, and we have these bursts of sadness, a lot of people will mistake them as, oh, now I have depression, but that's not what it is. It's just a type of depression, and over time, that depression either gets better and then goes away, or it goes away completely and then you don't deal with it anymore. I think it's important to reach out to a doctor maybe during that time if it lasts longer than you think it should, and see what they say and see what they can do for you, because it's always important to really recognize what you're going through and then how you're going to move forward with it. So sometimes this depression is going to resolve itself as time passes. See, people who have good coping mechanisms and resilience may be more likely to recover on their own with self-care and a support system. One coping strategy that can be helpful to put your energy towards solving a problem. No matter what sort of stress you're dealing with, looking for things that you can improve in the situation can help you focus for that response in the future. See, analyze the situation, consider solutions that may help make things better, and then work towards achieving those goals. This approach can also keep your focus on the aspects of the situation that you can control, than rather on dealing with the ones that are out of your hands. Something I kind of think about too, that is when you may lose a loved one to suicide. Now, of course, there's no way to make that better, but I think if you were able to set up coping mechanisms for it and maybe talk to a therapist about it and talk it through and get it off your chest and have a support system, over time it gets easier to talk about it, and it gets easier to have an open communication with people. Now, this is the one situation that I don't think is, maybe for some people it does, but over time it might not get easier because you lost that person in such a traumatic way. So for you, it's hard to really cope with that. But I think if, again, you think of those good times and those good memories and those things that made you happy about that person and their laughs and their smiles, it might help you over time as time passes to really cope with that. Now, of course, you will never fully understand what they were thinking or maybe how they were feeling because maybe they didn't share that with you and you didn't see that side of them. So it can be hard to comprehend. But maybe if you talk to other people who've gone through it or reach out to, like I said, a therapist and talk through it with them, it just might be a way over time. It might just be easier to really understand and keep moving forward. Of course, it's not easy, but it's worth knowing that even though this traumatic thing happened to you, you're going to be okay. And over time, it might just become a little bit easier and a little bit harder to sit with if you're sitting in that moment. So before I leave you, there are some life changes that can help you with situational depression, such as getting enough sleep at night. Sleep is so important to your body, your physical health, and your mental health, and can just help you overall live a healthier life. You can also establish a good workout routine. Sometimes when you have depression and anxiety, working out is that short period of time where you're not thinking about what's going on, and it lets you just de-stress and sweat and just feel good and have that short period of time where all you're thinking about is working out and nothing else. You can eat a healthier diet. This can help you physically and mentally, just overall. You can establish and strengthen a peer support group. So for some people, if you don't think therapy will help or you don't like it, you can reach out to friends and family members and have a strong support group there for you for those hard times, because even when you go through certain situations, there can still be things that trigger those situations in the future that you could deal with again. So if you have a strong and established peer support group of people that you can reach out to and talk to about it, then over time it'll be easier when those situations come up because you have somebody you can talk to about it. You have somebody that you can get it off your chest, who understands and can talk you through it, and in the future it will get somewhat easier to deal with. You could also learn about the stages of grief and loss and take time to go through those stages and heal yourself. I think one of the biggest things is when we go through something stressful and when we go through a situation that is hard, we don't give ourselves enough time to grieve and think about the loss. So if we take the time to really learn about the stages of grieving and loss, and then over time, this can help us heal ourselves as long as heal anybody else around us who might also need it. So as hard as it can be, talk about it and open up to people about it, and don't hold it all in, because holding it all in is not going to be healthy for you. I think that sometimes we forget that it's okay to grieve. And if you're having a hard time, I think you should look up the stages of grieving and maybe walk through the steps to heal yourself. Because if you don't learn those stages and you don't go through the grief and the loss, it's going to do more harm than good, and you're never going to be able to fully heal ever again. So remember that if you go through something hard, grieve the loss of someone you loved, or grieve the loss of that marriage, grieve the loss of that job, and go through those stages of grieving so you can help yourself heal once again. It's not going to be easy, but it's going to be worth it. And over time, it's again going to be easy for you to deal with any other situation that comes up in a more healthier way than you might have been dealing with it before. Something you can do for yourself, which I think a lot of people turn to alcohol and drugs and other substances because they numb your feelings. But in order to heal, you have to feel those feelings and you have to express them, as hard as it's going to be. And I can tell you that when I went through a very hard time, when I left my ex and I moved back home, I, went through a stage of drinking all the time to numb my pain. And I was smoking cigarettes and I was smoking weed. Those were my coping mechanisms because that was something that was helping me get through what I needed to get through. And it was only until I realized that that wasn't helping me, that was just numbing my feelings. And when I decided that I was going to stop drinking, and when I finally decided I was no longer going to numb my pain by using drugs, that was one of the hardest times because I had to really sit with those feelings and I had to sit with the reality of what I didn't want to sit with before. And I think it's a good ruling that when something traumatic happens to you, try not to lean on those, because I'm telling you, once you decide to lean off of them and once you decide to really face whatever you need to face full on, it's going to be way harder if you didn't do it right away. So take that time to really sit with your emotions, try to understand your emotions. Again, for some people, therapy is going to be amazing, or talking to someone you can trust and talking to someone that that knows what you're going through, because when you're allowed to feel emotions and when you're allowed to sit in them and express them, it's easier to understand them. One of the biggest things for me coping with depression and dealing with it was I needed to realize that I needed to let myself cry. I needed to let myself feel that emotion, and I needed myself to assess why I was feeling that emotion, what made me feel that emotion, and just allowing myself to really feel that emotion. And I think that could go with any emotion. You have anger, sadness, joy, happiness. Let yourself sit in that feeling and express that feeling, and then maybe by yourself or maybe with someone you trust, assess why you feel that feeling and why that feeling's coming up and what made it come up and why you're feeling that way, and just let yourself really express why you might be sitting with that emotion. And maybe you are sitting with emotion for way too long, and again, that's why it is healthy for you to maintain a social connection and work to strengthen your sphere of social support. I think no matter what mental health illness you're dealing with, even if you're just dealing with situational depression, that is something that comes but doesn't last very long, having somebody you can talk to, having somebody you can open up to about it, and having someone that you can trust to know not to judge you or try to quick fix you and stuff like that is going to be important, because it allows you to really sit with the situation, feel the emotions and the feelings that you're feeling, and then find ways to move forward and cope with what you're dealing with. A lot of people are going to go through different mental health illnesses, and they're going to deal with maybe different situations with depression, because there are so many different depressions you can deal with, like the long-lasting ones, or like this one that only occurs when something traumatic happens to you or is life-changing to you, but eventually you don't feel it anymore and you get over it. But I think it's important that you recognize that you're going through it and you recognize the feelings around it. So if it comes up in the future again, or it's triggered again by another, situation that's like that, or something traumatic happens again, you know how to have good coping skills around that and have resilience to be more likely to recover a little bit more easily than you would have had to before. So I hope this was informational for anybody who's going through a tough situation right now and who might be feeling new feelings they've never felt before. I'm not going to say that it's going to go away. I'm not going to say that over time it will get easier. I'm not going to say that you're going to just one day not deal with it. All of those are true, but everybody is different. Everybody deals with situations differently, and everybody copes with situations differently. And like I said, depending on the situation and what you're dealing with, it may take someone a shorter amount of time to, reflect on it and then heal from it and get over it and move on. And it might take others a very long time and years to years to really come with terms with what happened and to work on how they feel and the emotions they feel around it and the coping mechanisms they have with it. And over time, it might just be a little bit more of an easier thing to cope with. Not that it will get easier, but it will be something that isn't so hard and, upsetting to you maybe every time you think about it. Mostly if you lost somebody. I think if you're feeling the way you're feeling, feel the feelings and talk about it. And if you get upset, but don't push those feelings down. Let yourself feel the way you need to feel, because that is the only way you're ever going to be able to heal. So like always, I want you guys to remember that you are never alone and that I love you. Thank you so much for listening to another episode. And you know what would be so amazing? If you shared, left a comment, and liked this episode. Any type of support and love for this podcast is going to help it grow more and more every day. I'm so grateful to have you here, and I'll talk to you again soon.